Hello, it's been proved that the way we speak to ourselves determines how successful we'll be. So let me refer you back to this success equation, which is T stands for talent, so you're good at something. D stands for desire, so you've got written goals, you know what you want. Optimism, which I'll come back to, plus action, A stands for action, so doing something is what's required to succeed. Now, this optimism is really important because if you believe that you're actually going to achieve something, you're far, far more likely to achieve it than if you don't believe it. So being optimistic is obviously crucial to the whole thing. Now, I've already covered this. This is coming from Learned Optimism by Martin Seligman. But basically, the way optimists speak to themselves is different to the way pessimists speak to themselves. So an optimist, if something goes wrong, they will blame it on external factors rather than themselves. They will say it's just that one thing that's the problem rather than everything to do with themselves. And they will say that it's a temporary thing and that it isn't the normal situation and that normally things will be back to normal and they'll be successful. So an optimist sees any setback as being external, specific and temporary, whereas a pessimist is exactly the opposite. And similarly, when something goes good, it's the other way around. An optimist sees it's because of something inside them rather than outside them. They see it as generally the fact that they will be successful, and they see it as a permanent thing. They'll always be successful, whereas a pessimist is exactly the opposite. Now you come on to this equation, if you like, or this formula, which says that if you experience adversity, that affects the way you believe. Now, the way you believe, the way you react to the adversity here comes back to over here. If you're an optimist, you believe the optimistic way, and if you're a pessimist, you believe the pessimistic way. And then that has consequences, which is C. D here stands for if you are having pessimistic beliefs, then dispute it. And that's what this bit over here is going to be. So I'll come back to this, but you dispute it. And then that energizes you and you'll be more successful. So how do you dispute it? Well, basically, you look for yourself, saying to yourself things that are universal. So if you say anything along the lines of, well, this always happens to me. I mean, if it's good, that's fine. That's great. You stick with it. But if it's bad, then you say, well, always. You can't think of a single occasion when it doesn't happen to you. So you avoid universal statements. Everyone sees me as a failure, for example, would be a universal statement. And then you'd say, well, everyone, so there's no one out there that basically sees you as successful. You dispute it, you actually question it in the opposite way. And it's the same thing for polarity. Beware of any statements along the lines of always, never, ever. They're extreme. So whenever anyone says that, you know, I'm never any good at making cold calls, you say, well, never. You can't think of a single example when you were. So you dispute these universal statements or polarity statements. So universal is everybody and all of them and people, and polarity is always and never and ever. And you avoid anything that involves mind reading. So if you catch yourself saying to yourself, well, they wouldn't be interested in that. I mean, you know, that sort of business isn't going to want to buy from me. They won't want this. Well, how do you know? Because you haven't actually asked the question. So that's called mind reading. And you avoid anything, in other words, that's non-specific. So any of these sort of generalizations or universal statements, that's how you dispute anything over here that's tending you towards being negative and pessimistic rather than positive and optimistic. And basically, it's all about the questions that you ask yourself and the way you speak to yourself, because as long as you catch yourself, you know, doing the wrong thing over here and then actually dispute it by following these guidelines over here, you can turn pessimism into optimism. And all the evidence proves that the more optimistic you are, the more successful you'll be, the healthier you'll be, the longer you'll live, the wealthier you'll be. You know, there's nothing not to like about being optimistic, other than there are occasions when it pays to be pessimistic. So, you know, if the consequences are really grave of getting something wrong, then it might be a good idea to be cautious and pessimistic. But if the consequences are not that heavy if you get it wrong. So for instance, if you're pessimistic about making a phone call thinking it might go wrong, well so what? It's not huge consequences if it does go wrong, so therefore it pays to be optimistic. But obviously, you know, with what's going on in the world in terms of other things, there are occasions when it does pay to be pessimistic. But generally, these are the guidelines you follow. This is what you watch out for in terms of yourself being optimistic or pessimistic. And these are the techniques here that you can use to stop yourself being pessimistic and to turn yourself into being more optimistic, which will actually make you more successful, happier, wealthier, live longer, all the nice things. Hope you found that interesting. Thanks very much for watching.